Speech is one of the most powerful techniques in all of JJK, and we have only a few users that actively can use it, being Inumaki and Yuta with his copy CT. But I was always wondering, what would have happened if somebody else in the JJK storyline had cursed speech? Because it is just honestly something that is way too interesting to only have one person be able to use. In this specific video, I'm just going to be discussing what would have happened if Yuji was the person to actively have cursed speech and was able to utilize it from way in the get-go and had it ability from birth. Obviously, this would change the entirety of the JJK storyline so much because how powerful it is and the way that Yuji would be able to utilize it. Specifically meaning that if we have it from where Yuji is born, it would just be obviously a situation where Kenjaku, same person, Yuji's father probably being a part of the Inumaki clan, and it's a way of Yuji ends up being born and is raised with like the Inumaki family. It would be where Yuji being born would have Inumaki right there with him to be someone that he's raised up with. So they would obviously have some of the same words that they used, and they would be very good duos in like working together. Having them being raised together would be a very big determining factor in Yuji's like abilities because of the fact of it just helps him decide like which words that he uses and exactly how he uses everything like that. Yuji obviously wouldn't rarely speak and would have specific abilities and things that he can do that would just easily transform his character. He already has insane strength, and he's going to keep that since Kenjaku's still part of his heritage, but him having cursed speech obviously just changes the fact that now he can switch between actually like physical fighting, which he can still easily be able to do, and actively using his physical abilities along with his cursed speech in tandem. So he can be punching while also telling somebody to like stop, don't move, or run, or doing whatever the commands that he tells somebody to be able to do to make it work better for him in the long run. These abilities would just basically really help him be able to easily deal with curses and deal with a lot of things in the long run because of how powerful and how many things he would be able to do is just honestly insane. If we start off the story from a very young age, Yuji would be training a good portion of his life to actively make sure that he understands and how to control and everything, so he's not just going around saying words and making people do commands and everything else like that. We would get to the point where Yuji would obviously meet a lot of the other people like Megumi. He would meet almost every other person that was already a sorcerer way previously and have any kind of connections. He would know Gojo, he would know everybody way earlier, so he would already have a very good connection with him. So as when we go into anything along the lines of Yuji meeting somebody like Geto, he would probably have a good connection with them. Geto probably either way still goes the same way as going evil, and all of those events would still end up happening in terms of like Yuta and all of those events, because there's not really much Yuji would be able to do in this specific scenario to actively change anything, because it's one other person with cursed speech isn't gonna affect the entirety of the storyline so much that everything just completely switches over and everything just changes up to unknown characteristics. But afterwards, when we get to the point of where things would proceed into the terms of like the actual storyline and everything like that, we could actively have some real fun comments and everything. Because there's a very good possibility, like I say this in, I'm going to start saying this in a good portion of my what ifs. Good possibility, Yuji doesn't even end up eating Sukuna's finger, which if that doesn't happen, we can just run through the scenario exactly what ended up going around. If Yuji doesn't eat Sukuna's finger, there are so many things that happen in terms of, first of all, there's not a reason for any of the higher ups to ever have anything to want to deal with Yuji, so they're never going to try killing him, they're never going to try harming him, they're never going to try doing any real mischievous things in that nature. They might find him like extremely strong, but they're not going to be doing anything because of the fact that Yuji is just Yuji minus Sukuna. So meaning they're never going to send him over to the prison ward to try dealing with the special grade, and even if they did, they would not be doing it because Yuji is Sukuna's vessel and they're trying to see what he can do, they're trying to kill him or anything else. They're just sending him there, if they did, which they wouldn't, sending him there strictly due to the fact that they need somebody over there to be able to deal with what they need to do. And in terms of everything like right past that, where like we have like Yuji pretending to be dead and him meeting Nanami, he would already know Nanami, but him being sent with Nanami probably wouldn't end up happening because the Goodwill event is coming around, so he would be stuck there. He would obviously get to see Inumaki, see Todo, see everybody that he already has a good relationship with, and he would just be able to do a lot of the same things. Instead, this time, him already being there and him already being one of the top students in terms of the first years and almost anybody else there, due to his extreme strength, due to everything that he's able to do. He would just be this big, determining person. So the Goodwill event this time around would go quite a bit differently because, good chance, Nanami would probably end up dying in his encounter with Mahito. And it would be a situation where this time, when the Goodwill event eventually ends up going wrong, the main difference now is there being two cursed speech users actively does do some damage and takes away some things, because now they can be in two different places at once. Yuji can be doing whatever he needs to be doing, telling people to run, telling people to move, telling like Hanami to specifically like stop, don't move, die. So that actually gets to the point where now Yuji's actually able to do a lot more. So that Goodwill event could easily end up with the fact of Hanami most likely possibly dying, because him and Toto probably still have a good relationship and Yuji is still able to do Yuji things. There's a good possibility Yuji still has like something like Divergent Fist as his own technique that he's able to do, which would still be detrimental to anybody else around there. But him being able to command people to do specific movements would change up the story in very many drastic ways. As after that, anything that really revolves around specifically like Sukuna's finger side wouldn't happen in this scenario. The only main difference is a lot of the things specifically around revolving around like Shibuya and everything else might, if they end up happening, go quite a bit differently due to the fact Sukuna is not there, which would be one thing that Kenjaku really just needs for all of the events that he wants to happen. But if we go in the events of, oh, Yuji still does eat Sukuna, which I said most likely not going to happen, it goes in terms of Sukuna actually finding interest in having Yuji's body, because one, Yuji has cursed speech, so Sukuna can now access cursed speech. Was not a good idea to give Sukuna cursed speech. Not a good idea whatsoever. But now Sukuna actually has something that's Yuji has that is actually of use and is actively useful in terms of being able to do things with. This would mean automatically once Yuji would eat Sukuna's finger, he would probably still be able to control it. So meaning when Gojo gets there, he would be able to see that Yuji can still control it, which would be a big help. But Gojo already has known Yuji for a long time, so there's not a good chance. There's no chance either way that Gojo's going to try letting Yuji die or letting Yuji have anything happen to him. So there's a good possibility of a lot of those things don't really end up happening on that specific scenario. As when we actually get to talking about Nobara getting introduced to that really just goes quite a bit smoother, because one, Yuji can do whatever he wants to do. He has cursed speech. He's extremely challenging to deal with anyways. Now, when we get to something like the prison ward, the possibility is very endless there in terms of, do they need Sukuna to help? Do they need Sukuna whatsoever? Because I really couldn't say that they would in any specific format due to the fact of Yuji being so strong. Yuji being who he is and having his cursed speech might actually be a better help for everybody else, because now it actually evens out a few things and Yuji already knows how to use it. Multiple techniques, knows how to use multiple things. He's a very big help and a very big use of this specific part. And even if they do need anything along the lines of like Sukuna having to step in and do all of those things, it just really leads back to where the story would be in any ways, in all fairness. So there's not really much that would be changed in that specific form. The only main difference that I honestly see is Yuji end up taking like the L, Yuji having still doing the binding vow, and when we get to events like Yuji faking death, he already knows there's not really anything that Gojo needs to teach him. So there's a good possibility of, one, they only have to fake his death for a little while just to make sure the higher-ups aren't trying to deal with anything. And Yuji just using that time to kind of like, just grow in his own strength, because he already has his own curse techniques, he already has his own curse energy. So he's not like actively like starting way back in the Goonies and not knowing how to do anything. He already has his own abilities that he's able to pull off and do. So it would just be his own kind of small training. He goes with Nanami, he does some training right there, and after that he actively really just grows a little bit. With Nanami and meeting Junpei could possibly change in terms of the fact of, one, it might be a situation where he's actually able to like just like tell Mahito to either stop or do some small movements to stop Mahito in a few different ways, but I couldn't really tell you because Mahito is just a very weird singularity. And in terms of, oh, afterwards, when we get to the Goodwill event, it's the exact same situation. Now he just has Sukuna, which is even more detrimental. But he's gonna be able to do a lot of different things in that specific Goodwill event, and everybody already knows him, so nobody's gonna agree to kill him, even if the higher ups try to order it to do that. Because one, they all know him. No one's gonna agree to that, especially like Inumaki or Todo or anybody else that already knows Yuji, because they already have way too good of a relationship with him to ever consider doing that. As when we go into everything else and things going on like further than that, anything specifically revolving around like any of the cursed wombs, that goes quite a bit easier because the cursed wombs aren't as strong as Yuji, and there's a possibility that they don't die and Yuji finds another way to deal with it, but most likely they die because Yuji can deal with that way easier. And now Yuji actually probably has better control of Sukuna, since he already has his own abilities that he was able to do. So he probably has some decently better control, but a good portion of Shibuya probably would still happen in some forms, and Yuji still ends up going to deal with that. The only possibility that I actually see changing is later down in the line of Yuji being able to do a lot of different things, and Yuji being able to actively maybe have Sukuna not leave his mind, if we really think about it. But there is just a lot of ifs and things that might not be able to happen that we wouldn't be able to approve. But please tell me what you think would have happened if Yuji had something along the lines of cursed speech, because it really could be a very interesting story. But please tell me down in the comments. If you liked this video, leave a like, subscribe to the channel. I will see y'all guys in the next video. Peace.